welcome to the summit. I'm your host, Kyle Hamer. Today, I have a very special guest for you. My guest is Alan Gonsenhauser. Did I say it right?
Gonsenhauser.
Gonsenhauser. For those of you who don't know Alan, Alan is a man of, I don't know, man. He's a man of great reputation in the Forrester, Serious Decisions. He's done a lot of things, both as a fractional CMO, a CMO, and now kind of as his own entrepreneur. Alan, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Kyle. And it's great to be here. Thank you for the time. Good to see you again. So let's see. To try to make it relatively short, I started in finance. I got my master's in finance, and then I got into marketing relatively early in my career, different levels of marketing, and was chief marketing officer at a number of companies, and also general manager, a BU general manager at a number of companies over many years, but mostly CMOs. And then, as you just indicated, I spent 6 years at Serious Decisions in the CMO executive group. So in those 6 years, I mentored, actually counted 108 CMOs and VPs of marketing to help them do better marketing and not make all the same mistakes I've made my whole career. And I was also responsible for their healthcare segments because that's one of the domains I have a lot of experience in. Then we were acquired by Forrester, and I stayed on a couple of years. And the second year, they started changing things and wanted analysts to generate IP and generate content, which wasn't as much of a fit for me. So I left in early 2021 and formed my own company, which is Demand Revenue, demandrevenue.com. And what I've been doing for the last 2 years, and really loving this, is I've been a fractional CMO and interim CMO at 3 companies. I've mentored a number of CMOs and VPs of marketing at different companies. And for one client, I was doing quarterly projects to get sales and marketing on the same page, product to audience transformation, and helped a couple companies with customer-led growth, which we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, we are.
Love being independent and, helping companies. And it's been a great couple of years.
Don't you have a tagline or something you write about that says "Stop random acts of marketing"? Isn't that you?
Well, that's on my LinkedIn profile. I mean, 3 things. I tried to net out what kind of problems we solve to help people. One is stopping random acts of marketing to help marketing become more strategic. The next is getting to excellent cross-functional alignment between the marketing, sales, product, customer success, and finance functions in companies, because that's often a big problem. And the third is customer-led growth and creating remarkable experiences. Those are the 3 types of problems I love solving and getting involved in.
It's interesting as you talk about those 3, and we look at today's topic, which is customer-led growth. I think that all 3 of those are very applicable to what we're seeing happen in the market now. There's this new trend. I don't know if it's trendy or what, but as the economy has slowed and businesses are trying to figure out how to do more with less, I'm seeing more and more people talk about customer-led growth. So
yes,
for those that are listening, what is it? What is customer-led growth?
It should have been obvious the whole time, and I don't know why people are just beginning to focus on it more, because closing new business is becoming less easy these days. But, to me, companies go through 3 inflection points from a startup and as they grow. One is to get problem market fit, that you're solving real problems that customers have. And then they get to product market fit as they develop one product and then eventually a product line. And then ultimately platform market fit. And usually companies go through those iterations. And to me, so once you have problem and product market fit, and you have customers, you want to keep customers. And when you think about the growth potential that companies have, it's related to, once you pass the point where you have a number of customers, it's really a function of how well you retain and grow your existing customers, which is a lot easier than getting new ones, plus the advocates that you cultivate in your customer base that bring you new business because they recommend you. So in Net Promoter Score parlance, that would be promoters of your brand. And And if you take a look at your net revenue retention and the amount of new business you get from promoters, that really is the value of your customer base. And the sad thing is, most companies are not doing this right, and they're not really creating a remarkable pre and post sale experience and loving customers and looking at customers as a growth engine, and they really should be. And more are beginning to.
More beginning to, I think a lot of organizations that I've come into, Alan, they tend to take customers as, well, it's customer support, or we're seeing a new term, people are saying customer success, but customer success isn't really defined. What are some of the common pitfalls? I mean, you talked about, product problem market fit, product market fit, but that pre and post sale experience, there's a lot of people who get it wrong or don't do it at all.
Yeah.
How should you actually start thinking about leaning in and building that customer led growth, or even that customer success journey?
Well, it starts with before the sale, understanding where customers are consuming content and what their problems are, and thinking of the value that you provide, not so much features and benefits of your products, all of them, but not doing product selfies, but understanding the pain points and the jobs that customers are trying to get done, and the relevant products that fit into those pain points to improve customers' lives, and providing the right content for them to consume in the watering holes that they consume content in, and letting them consume content in a bunch of different channels and not over communicating to them. Not doing email after email, or some companies, because they're very product centric and not customer centric, they may have multiple product lines that are communicating to common personas and just inundating them with content. And that's not what folks want. They want to be able to control the information they consume, and more and more sales processes involve a number of personas within companies at different points in time that are in and out. And while we're on the pre-customer journey, I would also say that, I've seen a lot of statistics that only 5 or maybe 8 or at most 10% of prospects will fill out a contact us form and become an MQL. So most of the folks in the pre-sale part of the phase are coming to your website. Maybe 30-40% of the people that come to your website will never fill out a contact us form, but you won't know who those people are, but you want to know the companies they come from. So it's really important to get intent data and understand where you have multiple people from the same company starting to crowd your website, because that's a real buying signal. After that, once people become customers, it's important to onboard them effectively and welcome them and understand what their needs are to begin looking at, begin using your products and services, and understanding where they may have some difficulties. But that's where the customer journey begins. And it's important also to understand that folks in the prospect phase and folks that start using your products may be a different group. So you may have different personas that begin to use your products that were not involved in making a decision, but they will be involved in the renewal. So especially with SaaS businesses, you want to measure the usage of your products. Once you onboard them, you want to make sure they continue to use your products, and you want to understand their level of satisfaction as they go through the customer journey. You want a remarkable customer journey and be able to really measure how happy or unhappy they are and what the reasons are. And that's where Net Promoter Score is really effective in doing that on a periodic basis.
In creating that mindset, that customer centric mindset, I mean, you touched on it there. You said it starts at the beginning, right? It's the the experience before the experience. And, if up to only 10% of the market is going to fill out a form to capture my information and share it, how should businesses start thinking about presenting themselves or educating the market in a customer-centric way? Because I do think that we have a problem in SaaS today where it's very, well, I'll call it navel gazing, right? We talk about how beautiful our abs are and what great bodies we have. And it's all about the company or the product and not
Right.
necessarily the customer or even the prospect or their problem.
Right.
How should we start to think about or move to a more customer centric? What changes does that drive to? What does that really look like?
I would say it's moving away from product selfies and features and benefits. Well, benefits are okay, but all the features, because you don't know which ones are important to customers, and moving the information that you provide more to let customers, when they get to your website, self-select who they are, what segment they are. So, and then provide relevant content that's based on research that companies do to understand the real problems people are having and the jobs they're trying to get done. And that may cross some of your products, but instead of starting with your products and kind of just doing selfies on all the features of your products separately on each product, understand the ideal customer profile you're trying to target and what their challenges are, what their pain points are, what the jobs are they're trying to get done, and then layer on what parts of your products will help them with those jobs they're trying to get done. And it's kind of, and I call that a product to audience transformation. So let me give you one example of a client. There's a client, and I've been working the last 2 years primarily with um, private equity portfolio companies. Those are kind of mid-market companies. And one company, actually, I've got it as a one of the case studies on my website. But one company, they had 16 different product areas. Large company, they've done a lot of mergers and acquisitions, and they had many different product lines. And what was happening is the product management and marketing people of each of those product lines were creating their own content separately, talking about the features, and then providing that information out. And I worked with them, and we discovered there really were only 3 to 4 personas, different types of buyers that were buying across those 16 product lines. So instead of throwing up features and benefits separately, I convinced them to consolidate to the 3, I think it was 3 or 4 personas. And we began to think about what problems they were having, the jobs they were trying to get done across the portfolio, across the product lines, and how they could deliver solutions to those problems. And so I helped them through a product to audience transformation, and we developed 3 integrated campaigns. Talking in each of those campaigns had a part of the programs were brand reputation based. Part were demand based, which was new logos plus upsell and cross sell of current customers. Part was customer engagement based to create advocates, and then part was sales enablement and customer success enablement type programs. And so instead of 16 different modes of communications that was confusing buyers, we netted down to 3, and it was each of those 3 talked about the pain points and solutions that the company offered, and that was far more effective and productive for marketing and sales.
Where do you think inside the business? Because I've been in organizations where they've had a problem with that, exactly what you're talking about, coming in and somebody in the company fell in love with alliteration or a specific way of phrasing things, and they're trying to boil the ocean and talk about everything, and they still forget the customer says, "So what?"
Exactly.
Um, but where does it stem from, and how do organizations or individuals start to slow down and break down that process? So how do you actually begin to think or start to shift your internal company's thinking so that you can have a conduit from going from 16 confusing channels down to 3 well integrated and harmonized messages?
They're different. Where you ask where it comes from, it usually comes from the product organization, because product managers are incented on just their product. So generally, I mean, you can't blame them. That's how they think. They look at a P&L for their product. They want to promote their product. They want to grow their product. And they want to drive P&L performance. So it has to come from cross-functional alignment, and that's one of the issues. There's another example, which may partially answer your question, Kyle. A large company, this was a health IT company, was trying to figure out how they allocate a limited marketing budget. They couldn't do everything for every product line, and they also had about 15 different products. A similar situation, different company. What they did is they set up 15 different meetings where they marketing organized and ran them, where they had marketing, sales, and product at each of the meetings. And they would start to talk about, what do customers care about? And there was a difference, with salespeople there that were selling the product. There, there was a difference between what the product management folks would say on some of these products and what the salespeople would say. Oh, we've got this feature. And then the salespeople would say, well, but no one wants that feature. That's not an issue they're trying to deal with. So part of that is getting different functions together and getting to cross-functional alignment, which is a problem in a lot of companies, where, once the product folks heard that, they said, oh yeah, well, maybe we shouldn't invest that as much there because we can't grow it as much, and so what marketing was trying to do was figure out, with limited budget, what they would focus on, what they wouldn't focus on. And that also helps, I think, in some of these product to audience transformations. It's got to be driven at a pretty senior level. And that's where I've seen it work really well. In fact, in both of these situations, the CEO was involved, CMO, and they got the head of product and head of sales involved as well. So that's an example where cross-functional alignment is really important, and different functions can have different viewpoints based on what they're comped to do. Does that help?
It does. There's a speech or some YouTube video way back in the day that I was watching where the speaker was talking about his golden list, and he talked about he would take his list. It was his email list, but it was his email list of customers, and every week he would print it out, which seems silly, but this is what he would do. And he would take it to the bank and put it in the safety deposit box because he wanted to create a special relationship in his mind with how valuable this golden list was for him.
Yeah.
And just because you're talking, right? It to me, there's been this large push in the industry in SaaS specifically where let's go acquire the market. Let's go burn up, let's go capture as much as the market we can.
Yeah.
But, resources aren't unlimited, but it's pretty fast and loose. And in the last 6 months, we've seen a dynamic shift from playing fast and loose to now we need to grow profitably. We need to be responsible. We've got to think about things differently. As we're shifting through that, are organizations losing sight of the customer? Like, are they losing sight of what really matters, or have they soured that relationship too much to be able to get into customer-led growth? Or is it going to be something that's forced because the CFO is like, listen, there's no more money marketing, or, hey, there's no more, we're going to have to cut commissions, or whatever it is, we're going to have to make adjustments. What is that going to do? What impact do you see that having to the customer?
Well, you had those issues during COVID too, where it's very hard to get new business. And so folks started focusing more on their customer base and trying to help their customers and being, reaching out to customers because they were having issues. Um, you know, it's easy to think, and everybody has always said that it's easier to grow with your existing customers that have bought into your brand than to get new business. And especially now where it's more difficult, I think it's maybe the opposite. I think more people are beginning to think about customer-led growth because getting new business and closing deals and the deal cycles have slowed down. But I would say, I can give you some overall information. If you look at the work that Fred Reichheld has done, Fred Reichheld has been at Bain for 40 years, and he's the person that started Net Promoter Score 20 years ago. And he just came out with his book talking about NPS 3.0. And the book is called Winning on Purpose. It's a fantastic book that talks about loving customers and customer-led growth. And he makes the conclusion that only 10% of companies are getting it right from the research that he's done. In fact, he's also invested in the market and made millions on investing in the companies that he believes are getting it right, because a lot of people have bastardized NPS. And his NPS 3, he came out with a new metric, which I kind of touched on earlier. It's called earned growth, and it's net revenue retention plus the new business you get from promoters of your brand that bring you new business. So, more companies are trying to focus on growing through customers, but a lot of things have to be right. It can't just be lip service. You have to really, it's got to come, I've been asked before, well, who should lead customer-led growth? Should it be the chief sales officer, the chief marketing officer, and I said, the first person who needs to lead it is the CEO. It's got to become part of the culture. He or she can delegate that to a CMO or a head of customer success or a chief customer officer, you name it. But it's got to come culturally from the CEO. And the fact that so many companies are not getting it right, and maybe they're paying lip service, or maybe, also, Fred talks a lot about folks that are misusing NPS. Like I can give you, I don't know if I'm getting off track here, but when I bought my car a few years ago, and I think this happens a lot, according to him, the head of sales at the dealership said, well, you're going to give us a 10, aren't you? And I said, excuse me? So you're going to give us a 10 on our score, because the dealers get measured on that. And I said, well, I will rate how I want to rate. I'm not going to a priority tell you I'm going to give you a 10. And a lot of companies have kind of bastardized NPS to try to get better ratings. And you lose all the value when you do that. In my experience, and I actually have a blog on my website talking about going from last to first at one company I was with, a Swiss company. I was head of marketing and customer operations for North America. And we were lucky enough to get NPS information on us and our competitors from a market research firm that was doing it in the industry. So we were kind of an oligopoly of 6 companies in the dental implant space in this instance. And I put a group together to look at the NPS results, look at the detractors, the passives, and promoters. And it was a cross-functional group. And we found out what issues customers had with us. And part of it was communication, and part of it was invoicing. And, so we had representatives from different functions. And we actually acted on what they were telling us and then communicated back, thanking them and telling them the changes we made. And in a year, we went from last to first in the industry. And I've helped other companies through this, a couple of companies, private equity-led companies in the past couple of years. And a lot of this is obvious stuff. It's simple, obvious stuff. Don't just get a rating. It's, it doesn't matter what the rating is. It matters how you improve it and how you act on it and how the information's like gold. even if it's negative information and they're telling you problems, that's like gold, because you can't make things better unless you have feedback from customers. And it's very powerful to say, hey, customer said this or that. And as long as you can marshal resources to make improvements, I mean, that's how you improve your NPS score and get more promoters. So I kind of went off the ranch a little bit on that. Did I answer your question?
You did answer my question. I don't think you went off the ranch. I think you highlighted something that's really important in allowing your customer to actually have a voice, right? They vote with their
Yes.
dollars. And I've been in a lot of organizations and worked with a lot of organizations that are tone deaf to the customer, right? They pay lip service, using your words, to
Yep.
how important the customer is. But my dad used to say, "Oh man," and that the saying's just gone. Oh, actions speak louder than words. And I
Yeah.
think that customers, and again, I'm speaking specifically in the SaaS space, I think there's a lot of friction and stuff where the actions of the company don't make the customer feel valued, even though they're the ones that are keeping the company in business, right? They're
That's right.
paying them for a service or a product where they don't feel valued. They don't feel supported. They don't get what they need. I was talking with
Exactly.
Mark Stoos, who's the CEO of Proof Analytics. And he was talking about how large enterprises in the upper end of that mid-market, they're changing their buying behavior with software companies now. And instead of signing multi-year agreements, they're starting to look at what is this going to be from a transformational change management piece, and can we actually get value out of it, because they're finding that they're wasting millions of dollars on software that doesn't get used. So net promoter score, I think, is really, really important in understanding and giving a tool, one avenue for your customer to give you feedback. What I think is interesting though is you talked about, is it your earned revenue growth? Is that what you called it? I can't remember what you
Yeah.
came NPS and your net revenue retention.
What Fred Reichheld in his book talks about, he has a new metric he's saying is part of NPS 3.0, and he's calling it earned growth. And it's pretty simple. It's two things. One, hopefully every company can measure, and that's, you've got gross retention, which is how much of the business you had from customers did you keep. And then there's net revenue retention that adds how much additional business you got from customers. And the two components are net revenue retention, and if you can bifurcate the amount of new business you got from customer referrals, right? So net revenue retention plus new business from existing customer referrals, he's calling that earned growth. That's kind of the value of your customer base. And that's going to, over time, result in lifetime value.
That's an interesting and a complex algebra equation, because it gets into credit, right? Who's going to get credit for where this dollar came from? Did it come from marketing? Did it come from sales? Did it come from customer success?
Oh, no, that doesn't matter. It matters, it doesn't matter what function internally. It matters that it came from a customer referral. Wherever that, whether it came from marketing, sales, customer, the internals, this is an external measure. And it may be easier said than done, because you have to have a measurement process to know, okay, this came in, was it a referral from an existing customer? Whether marketing, sales, customer success drove it. That's the intention.
So if I'm putting together my plan and I'm thinking about the programs, how do you begin modeling that, or begin looking at that from a LTV, your lifetime value, and in calculating that earned growth? How does that, in the organizations that you've worked with, how does that begin to transform what they're doing from programs? How do they think different?
Well, that's a new metric. He just came out recently with this. So I think the challenge is, can organizations track the new business they're getting and split them between a customer referral and what wasn't a customer referral? And so you'll have to have a measurement system to do that. So for every new business deal, for every new logo, you'll have to know, was this a customer referral or not? The ones that were, you put in one pool and you add that to net revenue retention, and that's what he's trying to do with this metric. The important point is it's easier to grow by keeping your customers happy, retaining them, and getting them to be advocates of your brand and helping you get new ones. That's a far easier way to grow than always trying to get new business from companies that don't know you, that you have to convince your brand. So yeah, it's all about having a culture that is customer centric and understanding cross-functionally and driving programs and initiatives to create a remarkable customer experience and prospect experience before the sale. And then once someone becomes a customer, how do you onboard them? How do you track usage? How do you track their level of customer satisfaction and act on, well, the promoters you can use in your marketing and understand more what people love about you, but the detractors and the passives, do you take that to heart? Do you really understand what's driving dissatisfaction and create programs to fix what their issues are, to summarize and fix? And that would seem like you would obviously do that, but so many companies aren't. They're not doing the basics. And that's what I've helped a couple companies through is, a lot of it's logical. Well, okay, how are we going to follow up on this? Who's going to be on the team? If there's an invoice problem, do you have someone from finance? Are people empowered within their functions to make changes? Is there leadership support? So it's got to be part of the culture.
And to me, that's fascinating because I've seen it work well at organizations. But the part that I think is fascinating to me is that as we think about being customer centric and allowing them to come in, and then we start to look at I think it's going to be inevitable. We're going to start to see a lot of M&A and transition in the SaaS space in the coming months, right? As people look for different ways to hit their growth projections or valuations are still kind of off kilter.
Sure.
We're going to see a lot of M&A, and there'll be organizations that may do part of their due diligence where they're like, oh, well, this looks like it's complementary to what we have, or they're putting into that product suite just another line. Hey, let's take a sales team and let's go roll it out, and it'll be customer-led growth because we're growing by taking product A from this company we just acquired it and adding it to product B that's already been sold in, that we have the relationship with. It's not a natural fit. What I think is fascinating is that I think there's probably a way we should be thinking about even M&A and how we treat that when we look at taking new products to our current customers and how we treat that relationship. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, there's two potential problems there. One is that customers aren't interested in these two together, and so it's important to do the research and the due diligence to figure that out. The other problem I've seen with companies that have gone through a lot of M&A is they get a lot of tech debt. In other words, they buy all these disparate software and SaaS packages that are built on different platforms and don't synchronize and integrate with one another. And they have all these different, it's a huge CTO issue.
Yep.
And can take years to fix. And that's where you go from product to platform. But the more M&A, I've worked with private equity portfolio companies that have done like 20 acquisitions, or 6 or 10 or 15 acquisitions. And tech debt is an issue, customer complexity. Which customers do you want to keep? Do you not want to keep? You can't boil the ocean. You can't do everything. You have to make decisions on what you're going to focus on strategically going forward. And you have to do that in an aligned way, cross-functionally. And that's where, the CEO really earns their pay, driving the organization to be productive and focusing on customers. So, the other thing I would say, and I've written about this, what the CMO's role should be in pre-M&A due diligence. Oftentimes, in some organizations, unfortunately, the CMO really doesn't know much about the deal until it's done and they have to do a press release or something to announce it. But, I've written on, what the CMO's role ought to be in pre-deal M&A to look at the customer bases and, do some of this research that we're talking about and understand if putting these two together really will add value to customers that you want to target. And are the cultures consistent, and it will, a lot of M&A deals fail because of cultural issues.
That's that's fascinating that you highlight that. I think it's the Pixar story, the one that's kind of autobiographical, written by John. I can't think of his last name, but the Pixar story. One of the things that they talked about as Pixar when Disney came to acquire them is because Pixar was having unbelievable success with their
I remember.
movies, their creative process. And when Disney came in at the time, Disney Animation Studios was struggling horribly. They couldn't, I mean, they were putting out things like Treasure Planet, and there's nothing wrong with that show, but it didn't have the same chutzpah or commercial success as like
Right.
Toy Story, right? And so one of the things that Pixar said is that under no circumstances will we actually merge or integrate. We want to keep our creative teams in this bubble.
Sure.
And having gone through M&A and watched companies go through M&A, that culture thing is really, really, really important.
Yes.
To get right. Because if you don't get it right, I don't think you're going to see customer-led growth. You're gonna see a stall, probably in both companies.
Yes. Well, history has shown that's true.
History has a way of repeating itself, right?
Yeah, it does. And a lot of this stuff, is common sense when you think about it, but so many companies miss it. It's a shame.
The other thing that I think is interesting, because I saw this mistake was made in one of the organizations where the organization I was a part of was the first anchor for a company behaves like a PE, but they were coming into an industry. We were the anchor company they bought first, and they started adding other companies and then said, okay, well, now we'll start merging these companies together.
So it was a roll-up situation.
Yeah, basically. To get, and we ended up being the smallest of their acquisitions. And then we started rolling into different groups. But the CEO came in and said, well, this company uses this service and this company uses this software, so we should be able to cross sell. What we didn't do, though, or what they didn't do, is really get into the ICP and understand that the person who was using the software, they were not the person that was also sourcing the information, right? So like they had a data and a software, but the person who was sourcing the data was different than the person who was using the software. And the sales teams were deployed to go call the people who were using the software to try and sell the data. And it was just, it was an unnatural and ineffective growth strategy that a lot of people had lots of, yelling and screaming nights and closed doors because it was just the ICP. It's like, that's a different person. You really have to be in tune through M&A, I think, to be able to get that. Is this complementary, or is it actually a force multiplier? It can't, just because multiple teams in a company, like if you've been selling to one particular person and you've not team sold or had to sell cross departmentally, and now all of a sudden you're starting to add these extra pieces, it's a lot of growing up for your organization to do.
And do you have the right, salespeople to do it, and with experience, and that's where marketing and sales due diligence really needs to happen prior to the deal being done. And if it doesn't, you can have those kind of issues with ICPs and everything else that can really screw up an acquisition. And it's happened many times. Everybody has great expectations, but you've got to get down to the basics and the common sense to see if it's going to work.
In the environments that you've been in, where you've seen customer-led growth really take the organization by storm, what were the ingredients? What were some of the key? I mean, you said top CEO, but beyond the CEO, what are the ingredients?
Beyond the CEO, it's culture, and it's cross-functional alignment, and it's energizing employees and rewarding employees based on contributions to customers. And it's, not thinking of customers on how much we can get out of them financially, in terms of, fees and I mean, all of us have experience in lousy customer service. Maybe working with banks or other, not that all banks are that way, but that try to stick you with different fees if you're late a couple days, or look at some insurance companies. I mean, there's so many examples. I mean, my wife's parents died a couple months ago, and they both had long-term care policies. And so trying to get some things, reimbursed, they didn't pay much out because they died pretty quickly. I mean, they hardly even, got to the policies, but they're trying to nickel and dime everything. We all have had lots of experience with lousy customer service. I'm sure we could think of many examples. And then we have examples of great customer service. Look at Nordstrom as an example. I think that's one company that has a great brand, and you can return things, or even Amazon. If you buy stuff and it's wrong or whatever, you can return it. Yeah, I've returned stuff 6 months later. I mean, that's great customer service. And there's so many that just try to trap you, and once they make a sale, forget it. It's having a culture to love customers and put them first. And the CFO needs to be on board too. I'm not saying giving away the business, but not trying to nickel and dime people, if you're talking consumer or companies, understand what will make your customers promoters and love your brand, and have a long-term view. Think about long-term lifetime value, not making a buck tomorrow or a comp tomorrow, but have a long view. And even sales compensation plans, maybe have an element of retention. Don't sell people stuff they don't need. Make sure there's a fit with the problems they're trying to solve. So, a lot of it seems like common sense and basic, but it's treating people the way you want to be treated. Right?
And I think that sounds like common sense. Says easy, does hard, right?
Yeah.
Says easy, does hard. Alan, if somebody wants to get a hold of you, where can they find you?
They can find me at demandrevenue.com. It's a lot easier than spelling my name. I have an easier email, which is ag@demandrevenue.com, and happy to talk with anyone.
That's awesome. Well, it's been another great episode here on the Summit Podcast. Very special thanks to Alan for coming on, sharing with us about customer-led growth. Until next week, stay focused on your customer, stay focused on improving, and we'll be back next week with a fun episode.
Thank you, Kyle. Appreciate your time.